Hello, and welcome to the SAVAT Sexual Assault Response Team panel discussion. During this panel, we will hear directly from those who are professionals in the roles we just discussed, including a rape crisis center advocate, a law enforcement officer, a forensic nurse examiner, and a prosecutor. These individuals work on different sexual assault response teams throughout the state to help pursue this interdisciplinary and victim-centered response. By the end of this training, advocates should be able to compare and contrast their role with the role of law enforcement, forensic nurse examiners, and prosecutors. They should also be able to describe what a sexual assault forensic exam is, as well as explain the importance of advocacy through the criminal justice process. And lastly, understand the relationship between prosecutors and victims in order to better manage victim expectations throughout the criminal justice process. Before we begin, I would like to give a brief introduction from each of our panelists. For the role of a rape crisis center advocate, we have Caitlin Huber. She has served as the primary legal specialist and sexual assault response team coordinator at Care Healing Center of Carroll County for the past 6 years. She brings over 8 years of experience in the mental health field. In her current role, she leads a multidisciplinary team of medical, victim assistance, law enforcement, and legal professionals dedicated to providing victim-centered and trauma-informed responses to survivors of sexual assault and violence and their loved ones. Additionally, as CARE's legal specialist, Caitlin accompanies survivors to police interviews, investigative procedures, and both civil and criminal court proceedings, including peace and protective orders, trials, and sentencing hearings, offering on-site support, advocacy, and resources throughout the process. In recognition of her leadership and expertise, Caitlin was appointed as the victim advocacy representative on the Maryland Sexual Assault Evidence Kit Policy and Funding Committee through the Office of the Attorney General.
For the role of the forensic nurse examiner, we have Shannon Temple. She serves as the forensic nurse program coordinator for Shore Regional Health, a forensic program that serves the Midshore community of Maryland's Eastern Shore. Shannon also serves as the SART leader for teams located in Kent, Queen Anne's, Caroline, Talbot, and Dorchester counties. Finally, Shannon is part of the Midshore Medical Team who serves the pediatric population at the 5 children's advocacy centers throughout the same 5-county area. For the role of the prosecutor from the state's attorney's office, we have Jessica Garth. She is the chief of the Special Victims Unit and the legislative and policy chair at the state's attorney's office in Prince George's County. A graduate of the George Washington University Law School, Jessica has been a prosecutor in PG County since 2014. After rotating through several units within the state's attorney's office, she was selected to join SVU in 2018 and promoted to a supervisory position in 2021. She's prosecuted numerous cases involving homicide, domestic violence, sexual assault, and crimes against children. Jessica sits as a member on the Prince George's County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, Sexual Assault Response Team, and Domestic Violence Lethality Review Team. Finally, for the role of the law enforcement officer, we have Sergeant Jason Morrill from Howard County Police Department. In addition to his work for the police department, Sergeant Morrill also serves as the SART leader for Howard County. Just to give a rundown of how questions will go, I'm going to ask a general question to each of our panelists. For organization purposes, I will start off with Shannon, and then it will go to Jessica, and then Sergeant Morrill. Caitlin, some of your questions are more specific to advocate work, so when we get to you, I will give you your question in a way that's phrased more applicably to your work. If you miss a question or your audio cuts out or you need clarification on anything, please let us know, and we are happy to repeat or clarify anything.
So for the first question, directed towards law enforcement, FNE, and prosecutor, what is important for a victim advocate to know about your role in the sexual assault response process?
So I like everyone to know that I'm a nurse first. I say that a lot. Meaning that my first goal when I meet a survivor is that their medical needs are taken care of first and foremost. And then I want those medical needs to be in a patient-centered, trauma-informed way. And then because of my specialized training, I always say that they got a bonus because I'm able to offer additional, the forensic options, collecting DNA evidence, documentation of injuries. And then again, we circle back around and end our exams making sure that all medical needs specifically to the assault are taken care of.
So prosecutors work very, very closely with other members of the sexual assault response process. So we have close relationships with our DV-SAC, with our forensic nurses, with law enforcement, and so on. But we often, as prosecutors, don't enter the process or make contact with the victim until later in the process. So when a victim or a survivor is going to get his or her exam and is meeting with the nurse. We're not involved in that process at all. But once a case comes to us from law enforcement or from the survivor, that's when we sort of enter the picture. And we sort of have dual interests. We represent the state, so we are trying to decide whether we can go forward with a prosecution on its merit and whether or not it's in the state's best interest to take a case forward. At the same time, most special victims prosecutors are very, very trauma informed. We are victim forward. We want to make sure that what we're doing doesn't re-traumatize our victims and survivors. So when we're making our choices as to whether or not go forward, we are taking that into account in ultimately deciding whether or not we can prosecute a case.
So for the police department or my detectives, the primary focus is obviously it's the criminal side. We do care about the well-being of the victim, but that's primarily what we have the advocates for. A lot of our cases, there's more than one of us working it, and there's more than one element at a time. So our initial response, a lot of things are time sensitive because we're maybe coordinating, getting information from the victim so we can then go maybe do a search warrant or file charges, make an arrest on a suspect. So sometimes we might come off a little pushy trying to get things from the victims, but time is not our friend, and sometimes we have to move fast to get things before we lose evidence or lose suspects.
Thank you. And Caitlin, how do you explain your role as an advocate to others in the response process and or the survivor?
So, as a victim advocate, I work alongside other professionals to make sure that survivors are met with compassionate care from the very beginning. It's very important that my role becomes involved with the victim from the very first moment that they are introduced to the system. My goal is to help create a response that feels safe, supportive, and even empowering so that the survivor doesn't ever feel re-traumatized by the system and they feel encouraged to stay connected to the process if and when they're ready to do so. I explained to each of the members of the response team that my role is to prioritize the needs, the rights, and the overall well-being of the survivor as they go through this process. Some of the things that I let them know that I do is that I provide, emotional support, crisis intervention, information about options and resources, as well as a plethora of accompaniments. So whether that's an accompaniment to medical exams, interviews, with the police, court proceedings, all of those things are in my repertoire of things that I work with survivors on. My goal, again, is to ensure that the survivor understands in layman's terms what's happening and feel empowered to make informed decisions that are best for them in their situation. I really try to emphasize that the survivor has choices with every step, because survivors, when they feel heard and supported, they're more likely to stay engaged, which ultimately benefits everyone involved in the response team process. When I speak directly with survivors, I let them know that I'm here to support them, help them understand all of their options, and ensure that they're not going through this process alone, because it can feel, in my experience with working with survivors, very alone for them. And we're a bunch of strangers, so we have to build that rapport to them. We have to do the extra work to make them feel as though this is something that they want to be involved in. I let them know again all of the things that I'm able to help them with, and that it's never my job to tell them what to do, but to give them all of their options so that they can make the best decision for themselves, and that I won't ever share anything that they share with me without their permission. Because truly survivors deserve to feel in control of their choices, and I'm here to support them through every step of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. For the next question, directed towards the FNE, prosecutor, and law enforcement, how do you work with victim advocates throughout the sexual assault response process? So, for example, before, during, and after a sexual assault forensic exam, during interviews, etc.
I would like to start this question by saying that I couldn't do my job as effectively as I do every day without the advocates. I'm very lucky, I feel like, in my particular program is that we have in-person advocacy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so that process to kind of jump on the question, before a survivor may present to the ER or however they're getting to needing the team started. 24/7, like I said, we call the advocacy. If I receive a call from the ER, I call advocacy and we meet in person with the survivor. Um, and the process starts kind of like Caitlin said, hand in hand. The advocate walks in with myself or one of my team members. And then during the advocate, if the patient wants, they stay at the bedside the entire time, be it 6 hours, 8 hours, what have you, that exam may last. They stay at the bedside during the safe collection. They also bring care bags for every patient that we see in our particular system. The bags are full of, because most likely I'm going to take their clothing, the bags are full of multiple outfits, personal items, hygiene, journals. We talk about the importance of journaling and kind of moving forward with the process, things that can help them inside that bag. And then after, for our particular program, the nurses themselves, we do not have a lot of contact with our survivors after we see them in the acute phase of the process. And the advocate becomes kind of our number one contact. If a patient has a medical question, and I'm not very good at, I'm not at my desk very often, so that they know that they can text the advocate and the advocate can get a hold of me 24/7. I can answer that question. But the advocate is instrumental in moving forward and kind of being that point of contact between the team and the survivor.
As prosecutors, we also really rely on our advocates and the relationship between our advocates and our survivors. When we're making contact with victims, by that point, usually the advocates have established a relationship and a rapport with the survivor, and they truly are providing advocacy on behalf of the survivor, even to our office, to help us understand what might be the best outcome for our victims in our cases. We are happy to have advocates involved in the process as much as they can be. So that includes when we bring in the survivor to speak with the prosecutor, to meet the prosecutor, an advocate can be present. An advocate can be present in the courtroom while the victim is testifying and can sit with the victim throughout the course of the trial, if the victim chooses to be present for the trial, and really can just sort of be, a liaison or a go-between, even if the victim or the survivor doesn't want to have direct contact with the prosecutor, although we are, of course, always open to having that direct contact and just having an advocate present. But overall, we really, really value the efforts of advocates to make sure that we're not just focusing on the prosecution, but more of, the wraparound services that our survivors need.
So for our side, the advocate's usually either there or just getting there when we get going for the call out for the investigation. Typically, the initial interviews, if everybody's fine with the advocate being there, we'll let them sit through. A lot of our follow-up stuff after the fact, we don't have the advocates involved. However, we use them if we come across a situation where we can see the victim needs extra services. We'll reach out stuff after hours or when we're tied up with something else, we'll have the advocate help us out. And like Jess said, they're great with when it comes to going to court, being able to be there with the victims because we have a different role at court. We can't really sit with them and kind of be with them during that process because we have to testify ourselves. So that's awesome to have them there.
And Caitlin, as an advocate, can you tell us a little bit about your work with victims and other professionals before, during, and after the sexual assault forensic exam?
Absolutely. So my role begins as soon as I'm called in, which oftentimes is right before the exam and before the exam starts. So before a forensic exam, I try to meet with the survivor and introduce myself, explain kind of what to expect during that process, and answer any immediate questions that they have. In my experience, this can really help reduce anxiety and give them a sense of control in a situation where they most likely are overwhelmed and feel very out of control. I also provide information about the rights that they have during the exam and then available resources, and making sure that they know that they are in charge of what happens next. Specifically, when we get to during the exam, I'm often physically present in the room or just nearby, depending on that specific survivor's preference. Um, my presence is more than just providing information. It's about creating a sense of safety, calm, and dignity in a very vulnerable moment for someone who has been recently sexually assaulted. So again, many survivors feel very exposed or frightened or even disconnected from their body during a forensic exam. So my role is to be a grounding, compassionate person who's not there to pass judgment, collect evidence, ask any questions, but just to simply be with them, physically and emotionally. So that could look like sitting beside the bed while they're getting the forensic exam and holding their hand if that is something that they've asked for, whether it's helping them breathe through moments of discomfort during the exam, offering, to talk about something to keep them distracted, or just maintaining eye contact and allowing them to know that I'm there with them. This emotional support, again, in my experience, has really helped the survivor feel less alone, and sometimes for the first time since their assault, feel a sense of safety around being around other people. Again, I think that human connection can be incredibly powerful, and helps lay a foundation for not only healing but engagement in the process of the criminal justice system. My goal is to work alongside the forensic nurses, always respecting, their space and what they need and their clinical responsibilities, but ensuring that the survivor feels seen and heard throughout that process. After the exam is truly where I'm spending the majority of my time with a survivor, being a resource. So whether that's safety planning, referrals to counseling or legal assistance, helping them understand law enforcement or legal procedures, or just being someone in the days, weeks, and months upcoming to follow that they can talk to. I stay in contact not only with them, but the other professionals that are involved in a SART team. So whether it's the nurses, the police officers, the prosecutors, all of those individuals, to ensure that there is a coordinated survivor center approach that is putting the survivor first, while also maintaining what needs to be done for the investigation and the case moving forward.
Great, thank you. My next question for Shannon, Jessica, and Jason is, what should a victim advocate be able to explain to a survivor about your role in the sexual assault response process? If you guys could please touch on confidentiality or number of times typically interviewed or mandated reporting, etc., that would also be very useful.
So I think it is really important that an advocate knows the particular hospital system that they are going to be responding to. Um, I will say, unfortunately, programs are not kind of don't have that blanketed procedures, paperwork, similar offerings across the state. It is program to program, so I think it's really important to understand the geographical location and the hospital system that you're working for. And with that, know what the particular forensic program can offer. Um, you know, do they offer 24/7 responses? Is it something that you're going to have to schedule a time at the Rape Crisis Center, get that nurse there? Do they offer STI testing? Do they offer meds on site where they leave and don't have to go to a pharmacy? Do they offer pregnancy prophylaxis? A big one that's different from program to program is HIV treatment, HIV prophylaxis, HIV testing. I can, off the top of my head right now, tell you 5 different programs that are done 5 different ways. So I think it's really important to know where you're going to be responding, know what they offer. As far as confidentiality, I can tell you what my program does. None of the safe paperwork, documents, none of that is kept in the electronic medical chart, to where that anyone that has a password for, Epic or My Chart, or however you can gain access to electronic medical records, they cannot pull up this paperwork and have access just by having access to your My Chart, which I think is really important. And it's a relatively new, it is statute, but it is a relatively new movement that a lot of programs are having to kind of go backwards and kind of fix possibly a way for others to come across information or paperwork about a very sensitive exam that you encountered or endured. But my particular program, knowing the advocates know that none of the paperwork is kept in the electronic medical records. I think also just knowing the state statutes of mandating reporting. So if someone tells me, if a 40-something-year-old tells me that they were abused as a child, I have the obligation to report that. And knowing that it's not me breaching confidence from them, it's just my mandated reporting rights that I have to uphold. So understanding all those caveats of the law and also program to program is a large task to ask of the advocate, but it is a really important one.
So I think it's important, and I sort of touched on this earlier, but to understand that as prosecutors, we do sort of have the dual concerns about the well-being of the victim and the survivor, but then about the case itself. And I think sort of hand in hand with that, it's important that survivors understand that while we're representing their case criminally, we don't directly represent the victim or the survivor themselves. So what that means is that if there are other issues that need to be handled, if there's a custody issue or some sort of a civil issue that we, a protective order or peace order, we're not going to be directly involved in that process. It also means that anything that the survivor tells us is not protected by confidentiality. In fact, we have ethical obligations to turn over pretty much any information that we receive from a victim or survivor that's relevant to the case. Now, that doesn't mean that victims and survivors shouldn't tell us things, because it is ultimately very important to the case and ultimately will probably come out during the course of the trial. So, I do encourage people to be open and honest with us about what's going on, but just understand that that information will not remain confidential. There are legal statutes in place, and there are certain practices that we have to protect our survivors, their privacy as much as that we can. So, for example, we pretty regularly do not provide contact information such as addresses, dates of birth, unless they're relevant, phone numbers, to defense If we have to turn those over, we make sure that those only go to counsel and don't go to the defendant themselves to protect our victims' privacy and protect them from harassment. It's also law in the state of Maryland that we do not put victims' names into our charging documents any longer. So those are just going to be initials that you see in public charging documents. Obviously, when we're turning, discovery over, victims' specific information is going to be turned over at that point to the other side. It's also important to understand that the criminal process can be lengthy. So, you have this acute or even, ongoing abuse that's occurring. You go through the process of the forensic exam, and then it's kind of like a hurry up and wait situation where, you may not have your trial go forward if it's going to be a trial. It could be months. It could even be years sometimes in certain situations. And what that means is that, we may need to meet with our victims multiple times during the process of preparing a case. Now, that doesn't mean that every time that we meet with somebody, we're going to need to go through what happened over and over. Some of it is just rapport building. Some of it is just checking in, but there will be multiple times that we have to meet with our victims throughout the process. And the last thing that I did want to touch on is that we are also mandated reporters. So again, if something else comes up during the course of our investigation, we are obligated to turn that information over as well.
And for us, like we try and keep everything confidential, but the victims need to know that we have body cameras, so everything's recorded from the jump. A lot of our cases, we're having to go back and get cell phone conversation, text messages between the suspects and the victims if those exist, and all that stuff will end up in court. We try and redact stuff when we can, and with search warrants and whatnot, if we have the ability to, we'll get like a sealing order so the suspect's not getting all the information. So we try and protect that stuff the best we can. Like Jess said, these cases do take a while. Initially, we'll do at least one interview, and then there's at least maybe 2 or 3 follow-ups. And then some of our investigative steps will require the victim to come back in. We have a thing called a one-party consent call, where we'll actually have the victim come in and we contact the suspect with just the consent of the victim. And that's kind of a traumatic process sometimes. And that's typical when we use a victim advocate after the fact to reach back out. We actually have victim advocates on site that'll kind of be waiting for the victim after they make that call. But yeah, before we even make charges, it could be sometimes, 6, 7 months because we're waiting for the phone records to come back, the DNA to come back from being analyzed and all that stuff from the safe kit. So it does take a while before the state's attorneys even get it. So that's probably the big thing, is just these things take time.
And Caitlin, as an advocate, how do you explain the role of a forensic nurse examiner, law enforcement, and prosecutor to a survivor?
So, when speaking with survivors, I try to explain that each professional they encounter in this process have specific roles and are very different from one another, but ideally they are all working together in a trauma-informed way to support that survivor and move through this process together. So when I'm talking about a forensic nurse examiner to a survivor, I let them know that first and foremost, their job is to provide care for the survivor's health and safety. So they are trained to provide specialized medical care after a sexual assault, which would include collecting evidence if the survivor chooses, and documenting any injuries that they have in a respectful, trauma-informed way. I also make sure to mention, again, depending on the program, but specifically where I'm at, that they do offer testing and treatment for things like STIs and pregnancy if that's needed for them. I reassure them that the survivor will work with the nurse through each step of this process, and the nurse will then explain everything before they do it. I am very fortunate enough to work in a county where our forensic nurses really try to make an effort before literally every step of where they're touching, where they're moving, things that they're taking pictures of, swabs, all of that. They are letting them know before they are doing it, which has been such an amazing thing to see for survivors because they have the option to say no. They have the option to say, I need a break. I need a moment. Can we come back to this? And being able to do that after they had had control taken away from them originally is such an empowering and amazing thing to see. It really emphasizes that they can stop, skip any part of the exam to emphasize that they are in control of that process. I then explain, when we're talking about law enforcement, that it is their job to gather information and investigate what happened. Sometimes, the questions are very direct, and that's what they have to do in order to gather that evidence to make a case for the state. If the survivor does choose to make a report, I let them know that the officer will take their statement and begin collecting evidence to build a case against the person who harmed them, and really emphasize that survivors don't have to speak with law enforcement right away or at all, and that all trauma-informed officers should respect their pace, choices, and boundaries as they're collecting evidence. But finally, when we're talking about prosecutors and working with the state, I let them know that the prosecutor is an attorney who represents the state and decides whether or not they will be moving forward with criminal charges and ultimately the court process, and what that will look like for them. I let them know that while the prosecutor doesn't necessarily directly represent the survivor, they ultimately work to keep the survivor informed, consider their input, and treat them with care and respect throughout the legal process. I make sure to very much so clarify that the decision to press charges does rest with the state, but that doesn't mean that they're not involved in that process, and that their voice and experience remains central to the case as it moves forward.
Thank you so much for sharing. So the next two questions I have are going to be for all of you. So Caitlin, you won't have a separate question, but we can just continue with the same order. So my first question is, from your perspective, what do you think is important for survivors to know about anonymous exams? And Shannon, we'll start with you.
I personally think anonymous exams are an amazing opportunity to get the medical care that every survivor deserves and to collect the time-sensitive forensic evidence. But my number one tidbit that I ensure I probably repeat it 5 times when I'm with the survivor in the case, in the bit of collecting a safe, is that your kit is not going to be tested until you choose to make the report. I think that sometimes they're like, well, if I can get this kit, I've had this said to me multiple times. I'll collect this evidence and see what comes back before I decide what I want to do. And that is a very big misconception, I think, about the anonymous exams. So I know that personally, myself, my nurses, and my advocates that I work with hand in hand, that is our kind of take home about the anonymous exams. That being said, it is, I think we talked multiple times in this discussion about the time sensitivity, that evidence every minute really that goes away, every drink of water you take, every time you wash your hands, all the things that could be evidence that is going away. So these anonymous exams, if the survivor's not in a mental space to talk to police yet, to whatever reason that they're just not quite ready, it is a way for us to get that time sensitive material and kind of put it in a time capsule, if you will, and stop time for that moment with the evidence that we can collect in a safe.
I agree. I really can't overstate the importance of an anonymous exam if you are not sure, or if your survivor is not sure whether they're going to want to go forward with the criminal process, both because it is important to get medical treatment right away if you need it. But secondly, when we're trying to decide whether or not we can go forward with a case, we're looking at a totality of the evidence, which includes, the interviews with the victim, and includes other corroborating evidence. But physical evidence is extremely important in sexual assault cases, which is as you can imagine. And as Shannon said, every second that goes by is a possibility that we're losing physical evidence, not just DNA, but documentation of injuries, documentation of the forensic nurse's observations of our survivor and victim, photographs, just evidence that we can use that makes our case a lot stronger than if a survivor comes forward, several months later and decides that ultimately he or she wants to go forward at that point. So, when you do an anonymous exam, you're not deciding right then that you want to go forward, but you're preserving the opportunity to have the strongest case down the line if you do choose to go forward with a criminal case.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what's already been said is that probably the best thing about the anonymous kits is that it gives us a start date. Like if they change their mind and want to file charges 20 years later, we have that kit. We can just take it out of property, get it tested, and we can get rocking and rolling. So it's really helpful. I get folks aren't always in a place to go forward, but it's good to kind of get your foot in the door, give you an option to change your mind later. So yeah, it's fantastic.
So I agree with all of the other panelists and what they've said. But for me, from an advocate's perspective, I think anonymous exams can be a really important option for survivors who aren't ready to get involved in the criminal justice system, get involved with law enforcement, or make any decisions right away. I really try to explain that an anonymous exam allows for them to get the full medical attention that they need after a sexual assault, including that evidence collection, so that they have that option moving forward without having to file a police report at that time. I also really make sure to emphasize that, because a lot of survivors are worried about this, that their name is not directly attached to that evidence, but instead that kit is stored with a unique number that is connected to their name, but their name isn't on that kit for when it is stored in the police station. Um, I think it's really important for survivors to know that in Maryland, they have up to 75 years to decide if they want their kit tested, and to move forward with that report. I think it's a powerful option because it gives them the time to process their trauma, get support, and make decisions on their own terms without feeling any sort of pressure. And it's important to let them know that they're not losing an opportunity to seek justice in the future, that they're just delaying that decision until they're absolutely ready to move forward. And for some people, going forward with an investigation is just not what is right for them in that moment, and only they can decide. And that's my job as an advocate, to make sure that they feel supported in making that decision. I really emphasize that even with an anonymous kit, that they still can get everything that they need. And it's no different other than their name is not attached to that kit. But it also connects them with advocacy right away and follow-up support from my office, from different community agencies. Ultimately, I want survivors to know that choosing an anonymous exam is not choosing to close the door on an opportunity of getting justice for themselves, that it's a way to keep their options open while prioritizing their immediate safety and emotional needs first.
Thank you all so much for sharing. My final question, and again, this is for all of you, is in your opinion, what do you consider to be the most beneficial aspect of a sexual assault response team for both your profession or organization and for survivors?
So I'm going to start by saying, kind of focusing on the monthly meetings that our SART team holds. I think that those meetings kind of, and in combination with our response, it just provides accountability. Having a place where, like I said, our monthly meetings where everyone that is part of the team has a seat at the table to kind of speak their mind. We do case review at that meeting, or at those meetings, that everyone understands that we are all on the same team. We talk a lot about in our SART meetings kind of the wheel, that we're each a spoke in the wheel, and it moves a whole lot easier if everyone's on the same page and understands what each other's roles and responsibilities are, and how we can help foster that wheel moving forward versus getting angry at some of the folks because they have to do their job in this way. I think, but just having a seat at that table for everyone to talk openly and freely and trusting in each other as agencies as a whole is really important to having a successful response when you go out to see a survivor in what have you at the ER, on scene, whatever you have. Like I said, it allows you to understand each other's roles and responsibilities. It's not punitive when we do case review and we're asking, why didn't this happen? It's so that everyone understands why it didn't happen, or say, oh my gosh, you know what? It should have. And it never allows anything with the survivor to fall through the cracks with each individual case. It also allows, each one of us on the team has expertise, a particular expertise, and it allows all those experts opinions, holy moly, it allows all those to shine, if you will. And it can, Caitlin as an advocate might know of a community resource that none of us know, that we're able to hook that survivor up with something that can really benefit them for the long term. And finally, it allows the teammates to be informed as a whole on any community changes, community resources, law changes, personnel updates. It's really important that I really enjoy knowing who I'm going to be working with on a given case, and sitting down on those SART meetings monthly allow everyone to kind of know who's face and how we best like to do our jobs and how we can help each other do that. And we also, as a program, a nursing program, since we are normally relatively first in the acute phase of the SART team, we actually have on our consent forms for treatment a little blurb regarding, the patient saying, I'd like to participate. You can talk about my case in SART meetings or you cannot. And that kind of goes back to that confidentiality part. If they are not wanting anyone to have those discussions, we use case numbers only. We do not use survivors' names in our case review. But again, it just allows for that accountability and kind of throughput with the entire team.
I mean, I think Shannon did a great job of pretty much covering the strengths of SART. I'll just add from a prosecutor's perspective, the relationships that we build in the SART are very, very beneficial for the successful prosecution of our cases. Like Shannon said, it's extremely important for us to know who we're going to be working with. So when we know our forensic nurses, we can build our testimony even more strongly than, if we were meeting them for the first time. When we know our detectives, we can build our cases up and work with them a little bit more closely than if we didn't know them. And, because we have strong relationships, when something does go wrong or when there's a question, like Shannon said, it's not punitive. We're able to discuss, what happened, what we can do better, and give each other the benefit of the doubt that we're all working toward the same common goal of, protecting our victims and survivors and ultimately having successful criminal prosecutions to get abusers off of the streets. So mostly what Shannon said, but I'll just add that little bit as well.
Yeah, great answers, ladies. Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. It's very nice to have the other perspectives just to make sure we're not missing anything with our investigations. There's been times when we'll get information from the forensic nurses that we didn't have, or the state's attorneys will make a suggestion that we didn't think of, or anyone else in the room makes a suggestion we didn't think of, and it just helps us make our cases stronger. And same thing with us, we don't use the victims' names in our reviews. We use case numbers. I think we use initials, and that's about it. It's very helpful to do it. It just keeps us accountable and keeps us on task, and just make sure we're being thorough.
So I emphasize everything that everybody else has said as well, but for me, what I find most powerful about a sexual assault response team is the ability to bring professionals together from all disciplines. So a victim advocate, law enforcement. In my county, there's multiple different jurisdictions that all come together from law enforcement, healthcare. So whether that's the health department or the hospital system that we use, and prosecution to create a coordinated survivor-centered response, and making sure that we are holding each other accountable. When we all work together with the same shared values of trauma-informed care, and respect and even accountability, the experience for survivors changes dramatically. They're no longer facing a fragmented, confusing system, but instead they're surrounded by a team that is aligned in their values and supporting them. As a victim advocate and the sexual assault response team coordinator for my county, I've seen firsthand how this collaboration can improve outcomes. So I get to be the SART coordinator and do it from a more macro level, and then I work directly with those survivors on a micro level. So not only does it improve things legally, but also emotionally, because then the survivors are actually feeling seen and heard and respected. They're more likely to be engaged and stay engaged in the process when they trust the people around them. And from a systems perspective, we see communication improved, reduced re-traumatization of those survivors that we're working with, and a stronger, more successful investigation and prosecution all the way through to the end. For me personally, this work matters so much because I've seen what happens when the system fails survivors. And I've seen the difference that it makes when a team steps up to do it right. A well-functioning SART is not just about a protocol or a policy. It's a promise to survivors that their community believes them, that the people who they have entrusted with very personal information about themselves is supporting them and walking with them through every step of the process. And that's the kind of work that I'm absolutely proud to do every single day here at work.
Thank you all so much for sharing. That does conclude all of our questions. So I want to give you all a huge thank you for taking time out of your day to sit on this panel. It was really helpful and really informative. I also want to thank our viewers for watching this recorded session. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out so that we can connect you with the appropriate people to answer them. Thank you all again.